Congo's Caper was released back in 1992 on the Super NES, and is one of those games I've always considered to be a huge disappointment. And not so much because it's a terrible game. It's not, it's actually pretty okay. But Congo's Caper first showed up in magazines as a sequel to Joe and Mac, which was one of my favorite games at the time. The Japanese version of the game is actually called Joe and Mac 2, Congo's Caper, so I just figured this was going to be more Joe and Mac, just bigger and better. That turned out not to be the case at all, as Congo's Caper barely has anything to do with Joe and Mac, and in turn made for a fairly disappointing weekend rental. As soon as you start the game, you'll realize that this is only Joe and Mac in the absolute loosest of ways. Joe and Mac are nowhere to be seen, and instead you play as a half monkey, half kid that's on a journey to save his monkey girlfriend from whoever kidnapped her. So what does it have from Joe and Mac? Well, the enemies are the only real thing that make a direct return from the first game, as you'll be fighting the same cavemen that only seem to know how to walk back and forth endlessly until you see fit to end their incredibly monotonous video game lives. And at least the game is still set in the same world as Joe and Mac, so you'll see plenty of dinosaurs in fairly varied stages thanks to all the wonders that prehistoric times brings with it. But that's about where any similarities with Joe and Mac ends. The rest of the game is all Congo all the time, and that's really unfortunate. Playing Congo's Caper is a pretty simple affair. You'll be doing standard platforming to make it through the various prehistoric stages with very little to separate it from the thousands of other platformers that were available at the time. Congo attacks with his club, but it has a fairly short reach that can result in a lot of missed attacks. If you do manage to hit an enemy, they'll become stunned, which at this point allows you to push them forward and other enemies, or you can jump on top of their head for a super jump. But both of these moves are fairly useless on their own, and really only come into play when the game forces you to use them. For example, the first boss can only be defeated by rolling enemies at him, which can be annoying due to just how accurate you have to be pressing the buttons to even initiate the roll itself. Besides situations like that, you'll probably only be using the roll and the jump moves to find hidden areas or bonus stages, of which the game has a good deal of. But even then, there's nothing fun to find other than gems or extra lives, so it's generally best to stick with Congo's 4-inch long club and hope for the best. Even if fighting isn't Congo's best ability, he can at least count on his monkey talents to get the edge over enemies, right? Well, sort of. Being a monkey and all allows Congo to do a few monkey-like moves in some stages, like hanging from tree branches to navigate around trees, or jumping higher than anything else can. But besides that, the whole monkey theme seems to just be thrown in with no real reason. Congo does turn into a monkey when he gets hit, but it doesn't change gameplay any. You just look like a cute monkey for a bit until you get hit again and die, or find a crystal to change you back. It seems like a missed opportunity to set Congo apart from other games. Instead, we're left with a gimmick that has zero effect on the game at all. So don't count on Congo's monkeyness to get you through levels any easier than if he wasn't a monkey at all. Ultimately though, Congo's Caper just isn't very fun. Even taking away that it has nothing to do with Joe and Mac, it's still just a bog standard platformer. Nothing really stands out, and even the whole turning into a monkey when you get hit is little more than Mario shrinking when he gets hit. And it gets even worse when you do start comparing it to Joe and Mac, as it loses all the charm and fun that game had. Hell, the first stage of Joe and Mac offered more variety and cool things going on than Congo offers up throughout the entire game. It even threw out the 2-player co-op mode that made Joe and Mac so much more fun, and that by itself is almost unforgivable. Looking back, it was probably smart that the US release took the Joe and Mac 2 title completely off the game. But the damage was already done to anyone who had read previews about the game in magazines and saw Joe and Mac 2 mentioned countless times. I guess if I had never known what Congo's Caper was supposed to be, I would have just marked it up as another basic Super NES side-scroller and probably wouldn't have ever regretted playing it. But having Joe and Mac constantly sitting in the back of my head while playing doomed Congo's Caper from the minute that I pressed start. Still though, I never quite forgot about Congo even after all these years, and I was hoping that coming back to it now and taking it for what it is, I might enjoy it more than I did back then. But even on its own merits, Congo's Caper is still just a poor man's Joe and Mac. And when a game's best asset is to make you want to play the better game, it's hard to come away saying that it's anything more than a disappointment.